Greetings, gamers. HNS, and I'm making a lot of Nintendo videos lately. I love Nintendo more than anything, don't get me wrong, but what else I love more than anything? Final Fantasy. I've been playing this series a lot more recently, alongside all the Nintendo games of Fortnite that I've been playing, and I just had a lot of fun enjoying them through all the games. Today, I've done my time, to look at every Final Fantasy game, at least the main series. We're looking at the main series and the direct sequel games. And so just 10 to 13 returns are included, and 10 to 13 lane returns are included, 1 through 15 is included. I am including 7 Remake, even though it's brand new. Even though I'm going to talk about that one for like a few seconds, and you'll see why later in the video. But what am I going to do with what I talk about them? Well, I'm going to be talking about what the definitive version of them are. The version is a lot of them have been re-released on many different consoles. And if you're a beginner to the series, you may need some help when trying to decide what version to play. Well, I've got you covered. So today, guys, welcome to my video where we look at what the definitive version of each Final Fantasy game, starting off with the original game on the NES. To start off with the original game on the NES that you're seeing here. This game came out in 1987 in Japan and was re-released in the US. Well, it was localized to the US in 1990 after Square Enix was having some problems and they were trying to see if this game could sell to continue on, which is why it's called Final Fantasy, even though it's not really final. And NES version is the version that you may be familiar with if you owned a Wii back when the Wii Shop channel was open. This game was on the Virtual Console. And which unfortunately can't buy anymore because it didn't release on the Wii U Virtual Console outside Japan, and same for the 3DS Virtual Console. It is on Switch Online. But if you have an NES Classic, you can play the original. However, it's not the definitive version. I mean, it's a great game and all, and a really good entry and a really good kickoff to the series. But there's also several other re-releases that I do want to address. Let's talk about them in just a minute. Alrighty, guys. So now here we are on Final Fantasy, on the Origins version of the first game for the PlayStation 1. Yeah, the original PlayStation. Released in 2002 or 2003, just after Final Fantasy X was released on the PS2, which we'll be going to talk about way later in this video. But this version, it's definitely a big improvement over the original. The original game was good, but it's added new dungeons to explore. I think it may have added new characters, added new graphics, and it's FMV stuff, a remix soundtrack, and a bunch of others. I'd say this isn't the definitive version, but there's definitely one of the definitive versions. But there is another slightly great version too that we'll be talking about too. But I'd say this has so much features on the original. It's better for newcomers as well. You can now save easier. The graphics are way better. Adds new stuff. I call this one the definitive edition. Well, actually not. This still wasn't the definitive version. So next up, we have the non-Souls version. This version isn't nearly as good as it's not nearly as good as the PlayStation version, but it's still a good version. I mean, it had 4 dungeons. It added 4 new dungeons, added a few new stuff, and added a bit of new graphics. It's not the best version, but it's still a good way to play this game on the go. But there are better ways to play it on the go later in this video, let me tell you. And then the character sprites I do like a lot. Also, my mom may be talking in the background, sorry. My mom might be talking in the background, but this version added new, and the sprites and the graphics are still pretty good. As for the PlayStation version with Final Fantasy Origins, but it's still decent. And even with Final Fantasy 2 as well, which we'll be talking about soon. Alright, so next up we have the PSP version and the mobile versions. Yep, this is the definitive version. I mean, it has the best graphics. It's best for playing Final Fantasy 1 on the go. Get this on your phone or tablet or the PSP. It's amazing. And I tell you, this is the definitive edition. It has so much new stuff, new dungeons, new things, the PSP version, and new graphics, and it's a bit more accessible for newcomers too. And it really has new things to the table. And the new character, the version has a few new character classes, possibly too, and new stuff. I'd say this is the best version. Get rid of a PSP or for your phone. It is amazing. This is the definitive edition, hands down. But now let's talk about Final Fantasy II. Let's go. Alright, so next up, we got Final Fantasy II, which also came out on the NES, was part of the Famicom Toy Final Fantasy. Now this game originally did not release in Japan, and it also didn't come out to Virtual Console either when Japanese only games came over, so this game was only available in Virtual Console in Japan. But it's going to have it re-released on PlayStation, on PSP, and mobile, and on GBA, that I'll be talking about. But Final Fantasy II, did not release in Japan, anyways outside Japan. And the reason, the reason why was because Final Fantasy 1 came out in 1990. It's so close to the SNES that they wanted to just focus on the new console and not release anything on the NES much. So they decided to just move on to do Final Fantasy 4 and called it Final Fantasy 2 in the US. And then they skipped 5. After they skipped 2 and 3, and then they did Final Fantasy 6. They called it Final Fantasy 3. And once again, this is the real Final Fantasy 2 that came out on the Famicom. I'm not talking about Final Fantasy 4, the one with Cecil, and the one that opens up with the airship. I'll be playing that one in a few minutes. But the NES version, if you're Japanese, you may have this version, but it's more accessible if you play on another console that we'll be talking about in a minute. Yep. And now we're on to the PlayStation version. This is pretty much the same. You get the FMV sequences, you get the new saving options, the new graphics, the new characters. It's pretty much the same thing. Well, for new content, not the same as the original, but same as Final Fantasy 1. So, yeah. So now I got the Game Boy Advance version. It's basically the same as the Final Fantasy 1 on the GBA. The Dinosaurs version on Game Boy Advance is pretty much the same. Not as good as the PlayStation version, but still pretty good, I guess. Well, yeah. Same thing. Same features. You get all the same additional content. And, yeah. So, I don't know what I should say about this one. I mean, it's pretty much this. The Dinosaurs version also had the new dungeons and new characters. And very minor changes. Well, it just added a few new dungeons, that was it. Very minor, but not as good as the original was better than the original, but not better than the PlayStation version. That came from Fantasy Origins. The novel Origins from 2003 is a great way to play it. But there's two better ways to play it. And yeah, that we'll talk about next. So next up, we've got Final Fantasy II on mobile and Android, which pretty much has a new graphic, has everything from Final Fantasy on 1 and 2, the Origins version, the Dinosaurs version, that on the PlayStation Game Boy Advance. And everything from them. It has everything, has new content even, including dungeons and new characters as well. It adds so much to the table, just like Final Fantasy 1. This is also the definitive version. Play Final Fantasy 1 on the PSP. Well, play Final Fantasy 1 and 2 if you're gonna play Final Fantasy 1 or 2, play them on 1 and 2, play them on the PSP or on your phone. It's a vivid experience, and I wish they bring on the PC too. Because we're going into PC ports throughout this video as well. Let's move on to Final Fantasy 3, the final game of the Famicom trilogy of Final Fantasy. Alright, gamer, next up, we got the final Famicom Final Fantasy game, Final Fantasy 3. And just like 2, this game did not release outside Japan originally. It came out so close to the SNES, and Square didn't really have time to release, to localize them, and they were trying to move on and just play Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6. And they decided to just call Final Fantasy 4 2 in the US, and call Final Fantasy 6 Final Fantasy 3. But I'd say that the Famicom version has got to re-release on Virtual Console on the Wii U and 3DS, but if you don't live in Japan and you're watching this, you'll just have to play this on other systems. And like Final Fantasy 1 and 2, where they came out on the PlayStation, on the Game Boy Advance. This game did not. This game never came out to PlayStation like Final Fantasy 1, 2, 4. Well, I'm not gonna go to 4 until next. Several Final Fantasy games have got to re-release on the Game Boy Advance and PlayStation, but this one never did. Nope. We had to wait years and years and years to experience the story of Luneth for the first time and everything. And in 2006 for a remake. Let's talk about it. So now, Final Fantasy 3 took the longest to localize. Only Final Fantasy 2 released outside Japan in 2003 on the PlayStation, which was about 15 years. We had to wait the same for this one, but slightly more. I mean, this took the longest. It took 16 years for it to get localized. We waited until 2006 when it came out on the DS. And the DS version is one of the definitive ways to play it. I mean, it looks so much better, and it plays way better. It has 3D graphics and new features and new stuff. However, it's not the definitive version. Wonder why? You'll see coming up. So now here we are at another re-release. Because after the DS version, this game was re-released on the PSP, adding new features, including the magnet system. It added the option to have the 8-bit music. Added several new features too. Added better graphics. And the PSP version was also re-released on Android and iOS. So the mobile version, the PC version. But I'd say the definitive way to play this is on the Android or the PC version. They add so much more to the table and better graphics and new features the PSP version had. So get this game off the Apple Store or the Google Store on your phone, or buy us off of Steam. I say those are the definitive ways to play. Let's move on to Final Fantasy IV for the SNES now, shall we? The first off game of the SNES trilogy. Alright guys, so here we are at Final Fantasy IV on the SNES. Yep, we're now on the SNES. We're now on a 16-bit console. And this game also had a bit different versions. The Japanese and English versions feel a bit different, I guess. I mean, because the SNES version was several people's introduction to the series, and the series was popular. It didn't become as popular as ever until 7, which I'll be talking about in part 2. Because guys, if you didn't know, I'm actually splitting this video into 2 parts because it's probably gonna be long, and I'm already 15 minutes in, so I'm doing 2 20-minute parts. We're doing one covering the 2D era, which is going to be 1 through 6. We're doing another one for 7 through 15 in part 2, which was going to be a bit shorter, but yeah. So the SNES version is a pretty good version. If you live in Japan, you probably know this. It's really hard But this game also has been released on the Virtual Console in the US, but you can't buy that there anymore since the Virtual Console's gone on the Wii, and the Wii U Virtual Console version is only on Japan, which the Japanese version is really hard. You'll see why later in the video. But this version is pretty good. However, there's bad re-releases because because there are some better ones coming up. I mean, yeah. Well, this game did get released on the PlayStation, but it's slightly not as good. I mean, it had some stuff, but you'll see. Alright, so next we got the PlayStation version. It's pretty much the same as the SNES version. It's not the definitive version, both the same, it's very minor changes. But this game came out as part of I forgot what it was called, but it was some Final Fantasy collection. They also had Chrono Trigger. So I'll be doing a video on that at a later time because I haven't played Chrono Trigger yet. But I'm making a video on Chrono Trigger at a later time. I think it was in a bundle with it. I think maybe called Final Fantasy Chronicles or something. But Final Fantasy and a Chrono Trigger. And yeah. And this version it's very minor changes, mostly some cutscenes and stuff. Yeah. But you'll see more coming up. That's much better. There's even better version on the GBA. So next up, we're at the... And this version is superior in every way to the PlayStation SNES version. It's Final Fantasy IV Advance. There is an even better 2D version that's considered the definitive version. Free version that's not definitive because of how hard it is. But anyway, this version adds brand new graphics, adds new dungeons, new features. I think it may have the FMV cutscenes. It got the new saving system and everything. This is actually truly, I guess, the definitive version, and truly is good. And it has the easier difficulty of the North American SNES and PlayStation versions. And I'd say it's it's not the definitive way, but also a very definitive way coming up on the PSP. Now I will be talking about the 3D remake too, and just like 1, 2, and 3. Final Fantasy IV also had a PSP version with 2D graphics, and based on the US SNES version that had lower difficulty. This is the definitive version. It has better graphics, everything from the previous versions. It adds new modes, new characters, new dungeons, new saving systems, better graphics. Yeah, it adds like new things to your characters, I believe. It also includes the sequel game, Final Fantasy IV: The After Years, which I will not be talking about, but it does include that. It includes all of Final Fantasy IV and IV: The After Years, and it also includes like a new epilogue or prologue or something set between 4 and 4: The After Years. And this makes that the automatic definitive version. But what about the 3D version, which is not definitive, and you'll see why coming up, but let's see. So on Final Fantasy III, where I consider the 3D remake and the PSP mobile and PC version of the Definitive Edition, I do not share that with Final Fantasy IV remake. The reason why is because this version is very hard. That's because it is based on the Japanese version of the original SNES game, and they reused graphics from 3, and they brought the PC, mobile, and DS, and this game is really only for veterans of Final Fantasy II that have played the original SNES game several times and are very familiar with it. And if you're Japanese and you're watching this, which I don't know if you are or not, I think it's or you may not. I don't really know. Well, then sure play this. But if you are more familiar with the American SNES version, just play the PSP version instead. If you don't have a PSP though, well, then just play the PlayStation version or the Game Boy Advance version, or emulate them or something. And yeah, let's move on to the Final Fantasy V. Or actually, guys, I don't want this video to be too long, so I'm actually just going to end it right here. Because I'm going to split this up into 3 parts. I'll be talking about Final Fantasy 1 through 4 in this video. I covered 5, 6, 7, and 8 will be the next one. Nobody doing 9 through 15 after that, so please stay tuned. But I hope you guys like this video. Please like it, and if you're new here, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. And I'll see you guys next time for part 2, and then for part 3. Agent S out. Bye! I'm recording! Okay, sorry guys, but anyway, I was recording to avoid any talking in the video, but anyway, greetings gamers, Agent SN, and what you're seeing here is, some more Final Fantasy. Yep, I've been holding off on this video for too long, and I wanted to get it out as early as possible, so here we are guys. So last time we looked at Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3, and 4. We looked at all 3 of the NES Final Fantasy games, and the first mainline Final Fantasy on the SNES Final Fantasy 4. Today we're going to be taking a look at Final Fantasy 5 and 6, the last 2 on the SNES, and the PlayStation trilogy of 7, 8, and 9. I was going to say 9 for part 3, but I'm saying part 3 for 10, 10 to 11, 12, 13, 32, Lightning Returns, 14, and 15. So here we are. Let's get started with Final Fantasy V. So the version you're seeing here is the PlayStation version, which is Final Fantasy Anthology. Now, the original game was considered too hard for American gamers, similar to Mario Bros. Lost Levels, so it didn't get localized until Final Fantasy Anthology came out, which is probably the best. Well, which isn't the best way to play it, but the best way to have it displayed on a TV. If you want to be able to display it on your TV or something, or want to have a bunch of fun, yeah. Now, if you live in Japan, well, you probably are familiar with the SNES version, but if you live in the US, you're probably unable to obtain it, so you may want to check in the Anthology version. That added a lot of new features and is more accessible to people here. However, it's not the definitive way to play it. Yeah, but anyway, guys, though, then we're getting into the Game Boy Advance version. Now, Final Fantasy V on the PlayStation added a lot of new things that Final Fantasy 1 and 2 did, and that 4 did on the PlayStation. And, yeah, however, it's not the definitive way to play it. The definitive way to play it is on a handheld, and it is not the mobile or the Steam version. You'll actually see why. I'll talk about the GBA version last. So after so many years after this game was re-released on PlayStation, on the GBA, this game also got a remake on mobile and PC, and oh my gosh, do not play it. I mean, it's still Final Fantasy V at the end of the day, and Final Fantasy V is a good game, but the graphics are trash. I mean, look at this. They're like Vaseline smeared sprites, like a lot of fans call them. The graphics are ugly. I mean, who would want to play the game like this? They just feel so washed out. They feel so ugly. I'm not really a fan of the graphics like a lot of people. I mean, if you want to at least be able to just play Final Fantasy V, yeah, sure, but I don't really recommend it if you want a definitive way to play, considering that the graphics are super duper ugly. If we're going to play Final Fantasy V, play the version I'm going to talk about next. Now, this version did have many new features that the GBA and PlayStation versions added. However, the washed out graphics, but because the graphics are a bit ugly and they don't feel right, I do not see this as the definitive version. And I don't like the mobile and Steam version of Final Fantasy 3, where I consider it the definitive version. I do not share this with Final Fantasy 5. Nor do I do it the next game. Do not play the mobile or PC version unless you just want to at least have a way to play Final Fantasy V. If you're going to play it, you got to play the GBA version I'm going to talk about. So next we got the Game Boy Advance version. This is the definitive edition. I consider this... Sorry guys, my alarm was going off. But anyway, Final Fantasy V Advance is the definitive way to play this game. It makes the game way better since the original Final Fantasy V on the SNES was very hard. It adds a new dungeon, adds new character classes. It feels so great, and unlike most SNES ports, and unlike most Game Boy Advance ports of SNES games, where they're not as good as the original version because of the graphics, this actually does look better than the SNES version. And I'd say kind of the same for the PlayStation version, but I say this is the definitive way to play it, I guess. Play this version. Let's move on to the Final Fantasy VI, which follows a similar re-release path. So after Final Fantasy V, and not Final Fantasy V, which didn't get localized, Final Fantasy VI did, and it was called Final Fantasy III in the US, since Square Enix skipped Final Fantasy 2 and 3 and went to 4 to release it in the US. But Final Fantasy VI, now if you guys haven't played Final Fantasy VI yet, you have to. Final Fantasy VI is a masterpiece. It's my second favorite SNES game, and although it's not as good as 9 or 7, from what I can say, although I don't enjoy much as 9 or 7, which you'll see later in this video, Final Fantasy VI is an amazing game. It is my third favorite Final Fantasy. It is such an amazing experience. It is the best of the NES and SNES era of Final Fantasy you guys have been playing. But all that aside, what's the definitive version? Well, the game started out on the SNES. This is probably, I'd say, the best version to play it on. It adds so many new things to the table, to the series. It really revolutionized Final Fantasy until 7 came out, my favorite game of all time, that you're gonna see up next. And all the characters are really good. This is probably the simplest way to play it, I guess, and probably the most accessible way. And this game is also released on the Wii Virtual Console. The only problem, though, is that the Wii shop has shut down. But if you buy an SNES Classic, play it there. It is the most definitive way to play it. But what if you don't have an SNES Classic or a Wii, or if you don't live in Japan and you can't get it on the Wii U or new 3DS Virtual Consoles? Well, we've got you covered, because this game is, although this is probably the definitive way to play it, if you have access to those, games also available on. So we got the PlayStation version. This version is also included with Final Fantasy Anthology. However, it's not as good as the SNES version. But if you don't have, but if you didn't buy this on the Wii Virtual Console, or you don't live in Japan, you can get on the Wii or 3DS Virtual Console, and if you don't want to put an SNES Classic, well, the PlayStation version is for you. You can track down an old Final Fantasy Anthology disc, or if you own a PSP, a PS Vita, or a PS3, you can buy it there digitally. And this is also the possibly the most accessible way to play it outside of another version I'll be talking about or something. And yeah, it's mostly the same, so not too much. But let's move on to. Alright guys, so now we're on to the Game Boy Advance version. This is also one of the best ways to play it. I mean, well, I guess maybe between the Game Boy Advance and the SNES versions are actually the definitive version. This actually adds a few new summons and stuff, and slightly better graphics, but I say this is still the definitive way to play it outside of the SNES original. Well, both the SNES and the GBA versions are very balanced out, so just choose either. I mean, I prefer the SNES version's graphics alongside, but since I prefer this, both versions are just balanced out. Just play either of them. I mean, play on the SNES or the Game Boy Advance. Choose. 6 is still an amazing game, but I'm not gonna go too depth with it, considering the Game Boy Advance version is mostly the same as Final Fantasy V's Game Boy Advance release. So, yeah. But just like Final Fantasy V, there's a mobile PC version that's terrible and lame. I'm gonna be talking about. Yep, like I said, Final Fantasy VI went under a similar release line as Final Fantasy V, as it got released on the PlayStation, the Game Boy Advance, it came to Virtual Consoles in Japan, and and they get released on PlayStation, of course. But like Final Fantasy V, do not play the mobile version. Yes, it has some of the extra stuff that the GBA and PlayStation version introduced, but the graphics are terrible. I hate the graphics. They look so washed out. They look so weird. I mean, and the graphics just don't look right to me, to be honest. I mean, I understand why Square Enix made it like that. But I rather see a full 3D remake just like Final Fantasy 3. Yeah, the graphics just aren't really the best. They just aren't for me. Well, and for many fans. Play the PlayStation version, or play the SNES version. Or I guess the GBA version too. The SNES or GBA. And play the GBA version for Final Fantasy V. Or I guess PlayStation version too. But let's move on. Let's move on, guys, because now we're taking a leap from the SNES to the PlayStation. We're out switching, because after Final Fantasy VI, something big went on. We're flipping generations. We're going from 2D graphics on the SNES to 3D graphic. Yeah, we're going from the Super Nintendo to Sony's PlayStation, where 3D graphics were very popularized, and a game that revolutionized all upcoming RPGs and the Final Fantasy series. So, yep, and next up, we got Final Fantasy VII. So after the SNES, Square Enix was getting ready for a new Final Fantasy game on the generation. But because they had a hard time getting this game to work on the N64, due to having so much, and because the PlayStation was a lot more powerful and could use CDs instead of cartridges, and since CDs were easier and cheaper to produce, Square Enix moved to Sony. I switched from Nintendo to Sony, and we're on PlayStation, and oh boy, is this game better than 6. I mean, Final Fantasy 6 was an amazing game, but Final Fantasy 7 takes it to the next level. Like I said before, this is my Final Fantasy game. This is my favorite Final Fantasy. Not only is it my favorite Final Fantasy, but my favorite video game ever made, period. I mean, this game feels so special to me because I love its world and its protagonists a ton. I mean, I love its world more than any other video game out there. And although Mario will always be my favorite video game character, or Luigi, Cloud, I so much love for too. I love its world, I love its characters, I love everything about this. This is why it is my favorite game of all time. I love its gameplay. And yes, if you haven't played this game, you have to. But all that aside, let's just get into what the definitive version is. So during my original playthrough a few years ago, I played the PlayStation version, but I do own the PC version too, that I'll be talking about. As this game came out originally in 1997 on Sony's PlayStation. As it was the first Final Fantasy on a non-Nintendo system. And it delivered so much. And the game had a lot of new things at the table, although it's not the definitive version, considering there's a way better version coming up. And this game was re-released about a year or two after this game came out. Square Enix was preparing a PC version of this game by Eidos, the developer of all the modern Tomb Raider games. However, that PC... No, look. I'm not talking about the Steam version, no. There was an old PC version that was so buggy and weird and clunky, it just didn't feel right. But the PlayStation version, on the other hand, was so much better, but Square Enix fixed something, because so much later, they fixed this and made an even better version I'll be talking about. And we embrace new types of plays coming on every generation of PlayStation. Because even though this is a PlayStation 1 game, the game playable on the PS2 with backwards compatibility, and on the PS3, the disc works, or you can buy digital at the PlayStation Store. Same on the PSP and PS Vita, you can buy them digitally off there. However, this game's also available on current-gen consoles and on phones. The mobile version, too, though, is not the definitive version. But and there's a mobile version, too, based on the PC and consoles, but we're going to talk about those versions coming up next. And yeah, you saw it coming, guys. But in 2013, a re-release of the PC version, a proper version of it that added upgraded, enhanced graphics, added upscaled and upgraded enhanced graphics, added character boosters, added a high-speed mode, added so much new version table. That is the definitive version. Yeah. However, in 2015, a port of the PC version, I believe, also came to mobile or something, but it's not the definitive version since it runs better on PC, PS4, Xbox One, Switch. We'll talk about those. But the PS4 version also came out in 2015. Oh boy, is that the definitive way to play it! It looks so much better, like so much better. I'm looking at the graphics that you saw in the original PlayStation version a few minutes ago, and now look at this version. It looks so freaking good. I mean, seriously. And in 2019, Square Enix also had a brilliant idea too. They also ported Final Fantasy VII, the PC version, to the Windows Store and ported to Xbox One. If you have Game Pass, guess what? You can play that game on there, whether it's on Xbox One or PC. Isn't that amazing? And I'll talk about 7 Remake during part, and now I'll talk about 7 Remake in part 3, but very briefly, considering that 15's only, considering that 7 Remake's only available on PS4 at the moment. But and that's actually a completely different game. So play both the original Final Fantasy 7 and the 7 Remake. They're actually completely different games. But and 7 Remake's more of a reboot and retelling of 7. But anyway, all that aside, if you want to play this game on the go, when you want it knows your best option, you can buy this game on the Switch. It runs very well too on the Switch, so play that version too if you want to play on the go. And yeah, and that, guys, is Final Fantasy VII. Let's move on to Final Fantasy VIII. I actually just beat this one. So just like Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy VIII also released exclusively on the PlayStation originally, and it also had a buggy PC version about a year or so later. That was later fixed twice. But anyway, Final Fantasy 7. Not 7, but Final Fantasy 8. It's not as good as 7, but still my favorites in the series, and still a really amazing game. And definitely play it if you haven't already. But anyway, Final Fantasy 8 came out on the PlayStation back in 1999, 2 years after Final Fantasy 7 was out. And it did a lot of great stuff. And just like 7, you could also play it on every generation of PlayStation. Because you can play the original PlayStation game on the PlayStation, obviously. It's also playable on the PS2 with backwards compatibility. Same on the PS3, and you can buy digitally off there. Same on the PSP, you can buy digitally off there. Same on the PS Vita, you can also buy it digitally off there. And on the PlayStation 4, well, we'll talk about the Final Fantasy VIII Remastered as well. And yeah, in just a second. So the same year as Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII also got re-released on PC. Same year 7 got re-released on PC on Steam. The second PC version was out, and it's okay, I guess. I mean, there's nothing really anything new. It's mostly just a PlayStation version with very minor changes. They didn't even remaster the graphics like they do with 7. And yeah. And pretty minor changes. And it also hasn't been re-released as much up until now, when you can play on Xbox One, on PlayStation 4, and on the Switch. Let's talk about that. And next up, we're on to Final Fantasy VIII Remastered. And this is the definitive way to play Final Fantasy VIII. So you guys know by now that to play either the SNES, PlayStation, or Game Boy Advance version, but I might say SNES or Game Boy Advance version of 6, the Game Boy Advance version of 5, the remaster, then the PS4, Xbox One, PC, and Switch versions of 7. But Final Fantasy VIII came out back last year in September 2019 for the 20th anniversary of the game being released in North America on PlayStation 4, on Xbox One, on the Switch, and delivered the goods. I mean, look at the graphics. They look so much better than the original Steam version. The Steam version wasn't really a lot if you own the original PlayStation release. But the remaster is way better. The character models and graphics were highly improved. It looks so much better. And if you're having a hard time with the game, especially during the fight against Griever, that was very hard for me. And the music final battle was very hard for me yesterday and this morning when I beat it. Well, there's also a mode that makes it easier where characters don't die as often, and yeah, that's pretty good. As that new option, there's option turn off encounters. I believe just like in the 7 re-release, in the 9 release, you'll see next. Even though I've actually moved, I moved Final Fantasy 9 to Part 2, so stay tuned for Part 2 if you want to see Final Fantasy 9. But anyway, it also has the feature that it was like a high speed mode too. It's way better. It has new character up and it has new stuff. I say this is a definitive version. It's worth the go. It's worth the money. Play this version. If you're gonna play Final Fantasy VIII, I played the Steam version. It's the definitive way. But anyway, guys, wraps up though for this video. Let me know in the comments if you've played any of these 4 games or we haven't done so yet. Let me know if you want to or so. And comment about your thoughts on this video. Remember to like and comment and subscribe on this video. And subscribe if you haven't already for using the channel. So I need some subscribers. And that's it though for this video. I'll see you guys next time in part 3 for Final Fantasy 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, as well as 7 Remake 10, 2, and 13 Tooling Returns. And I will see you guys next time. Agent S out. Greetings, gamers, Agent SN, and sorry to keep you waiting, guys. And I was gonna make a new video soon too about Mario and Luigi to talk about how the series could be saved after Alpha 3 went bankrupt a year ago. But that video is gonna be my next video because today we're gonna be doing the 3rd and final episode of my best version of each Final Fantasy games. So in part 1, we looked at the best versions of Final Fantasy 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then we looked at and including the after years have been that part 2. Then we looked at episodes. Then we looked at Final Fantasy 5, 6, 7. 8 game, my favorite game of all time. And we looked at Final Fantasy 8. But now moving on to the finale. We're talking about Final Fantasy 9, 10, 10-2, 11, 12, 13, 13-2, Lightning Returns, 14, 15, and 7 remakes. So let's go. Starting off with Final Fantasy 9. So just like Final Fantasy 7, the game we're seeing here is the PlayStation 1 version. The original version on the original PlayStation released in 2000. The same year the PS2 came out. As it was the last mainline original Final Fantasy on the system. And this, guys, is my second favorite Final Fantasy. If you haven't played this game yet, guys, you absolutely need to. It's the same amount in the original PlayStation in 2000, and it's a pretty good version. It doesn't quite like the best way to play it now, but it's the original game, and it's still amazing, but there's better versions out there, including... but we'll go to it in a minute. And just like Final Fantasy VII, this game got re-released on modern generation consoles, on current gen consoles, on PC, and there's a mobile version too. The mobile version is sort of based on the HD versions, but not as good because it's a mobile game, so of course not as good. Mobile games mobile games are always inferior to PC and console games. But yeah, that's that. Let's move on to the HD re-release. So just like Final Fantasy 7 and 8, 9 also got an HD re-release, like I said, on consoles. And you can find it on Xbox One, you can find it on PlayStation 4, you can find it on the Nintendo Switch if you want to play on the go. And great news for you too, just like Final Fantasy 7, it's on Game Pass. If you have Game Pass, or it's on console or PC, It's there, and you can find the PC version on Steam or the Windows Store. And the Windows Store version is play anywhere, meaning you can just buy it once or play it on both Xbox and PC, and it's able to transfer over with your account. And if you have Game Pass on Xbox or PC, play this. Even though I played the Steam version, and if you really like PlayStation, then play on the PS4. But if you really like to play games on the go, the Switch version's for you. But that's Final Fantasy IX, everyone. Let's move on to Final Fantasy X, the first game in the series on the PlayStation 2. Removing hardware from CD-based hardware to new DVD hardware, and moving on to new graphics and voice acting that PlayStation 2 has to offer. Let's go. We're also looking at both 10 and 2, since they're both re-released together. We'll talk about that. So just like Final Fantasy IX, just like Final Fantasy 7 and 8 and 9, 10 also, Final Fantasy X was also exclusive on a PlayStation console, as Square Enix switched the Switch Game Studios from Nintendo to Square Enix because Nintendo Switch Game Studios to Square Enix because the new CD technology that Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9 use. And 10 used new DVD technology. Yeah, voice acting, new character models, more realistic graphics. This game is also my favorite Final Fantasy games. And it's just like the previous ones, if you haven't played this game yet, go do it right now. This game is a PS2 game, and of course, just like the previous one that said, the original version, not as good, but playing it is still fine and dandy. But there's definitely some different ways out there to explore Titus and his journey through Spira to see what's going on with Jacked. And to explore Spira. And yeah. Oh, and for Final Fantasy IX, though, I forgot to mention this, though. Final Fantasy IX also had new features too, where you can fast forward, turn off encounters, make the game easier, to go in trance at 9,999 damage at any time. I forgot to mention that. And Final Fantasy X had a handful of those things, I believe, with the remaster. Let's talk about the remaster now. And this is covering both 10 and 10-2. Even though I'm showing the footage for 10, but I'm talking about both, mainly. Because Final Fantasy X-2 is also a sequel to it. So next up, so let's talk about the HD remastered version, which you can find on PS3, PS Vita, PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, and it's coming to Game Pass on Xbox One and PC too, just like Final Fantasy 8, and 7 and 9 are already on there. And the HD remasters are the definitive version, but which version exactly? Let's talk about it. So the first part of the HD remaster was released in 2014 on the PS3 and the PS Vita. And those versions are definitely better ways to play it than on the PS2, but there's not really a big reason, I guess, to play on the PS3 or the PS Vita, because you can just play it on a PS4, Xbox One, or Switch, or PC. If you got and PS Vita version of the HD remaster that adds new things, add new features. I think it might have had an ability to turn off encounters. I can't remember. And it adds new graphics, new things, it adds new features, but the PS Vita version separated 10 and 10-2 from the package, to where you own them separately. And if you're gonna play on the go, buy the Switch version. The PS3 version's still good and all, but play on PS4, play on Xbox One, play it on Switch, or play it on PC. And if you're a PC gamer or something, or you have Game Pass on PC, or Game Pass Ultimate, buy an Xbox One or PC. Which I went for the Steam version, because I like to play the games on PC, because I'm a PC gamer, even though I'm more of a Nintendo gamer too. If you like PlayStation and you want to play it like you wanted a PS2, the PS4 version's for you. If you want to play on the go, Switch version's for you. And yeah. And same goes too for 10-2, basically. 10-2 also had new features too, that made the game easier, and new features as well. And yeah. And 10-2 and 10 are definitive in the HD remasters, both 10 and 10-2. Let's move on, and And that wraps up, guys, for Final Fantasy X. Now let's go to Final Fantasy XI, but I'm only going to talk briefly about it. Let me tell you. I'll explain why. So now, how come it's different from Final Fantasy XI? Well, I think you guys see, I bet you guys can tell this is an MMORPG. Because if you guys didn't know, Final Fantasy XI is not truly a traditional Final Fantasy game. Because unlike the first 10 games, which were a full single-player experience, and 10 too, I guess, too, Final Fantasy XI is a bit of a weird one. It's not a single-player game. It is an MMO, the full name of Final Fantasy XI Online. And this game released in 2000. I don't really know who plays it anymore, considering that Final Fantasy XIV exists. But you only have one way to play this, and that's on PC. Your only way to play this is on Steam, because the PS2 versions and Xbox 360 versions shut down. That's all I'm gonna say. Because the PS2 and Xbox 360 versions, this game was on back in 2000 when this game released on the systems in 2004 and 2006 in the US respectively. You're only gonna play this on PC, so if you're not really a PC gamer, sorry, just go play 14 on your PS4 and Xbox One when it comes out. But well, even though Xbox One's obviously already out, but it's coming to Xbox One at some point, and maybe even the Series X. But, I don't really know if you guys still play this game since Final Fantasy XIV exists, but, yeah. If you're gonna play this game, you're gonna wait to play this on PC, sorry. But let's talk about what I do want to go in depth about, just like 9, 10, and 10 2, because we're going back to the last mainline original Final Fantasy game on the PlayStation 2, so let's go. Final Fantasy 4, we're back single-player experiences in the world of Ivalice. Same world Final Fantasy Tactics is set in, so let's go. So yeah, here we go, guys. In 2006, just months before the PS3 was gonna release and the Xbox 360 was already out and rubbing and death problems were happening, there was one more Final Fantasy game on the highest selling console of all time, the PlayStation 2, after Final Fantasy X and 10-2, and I guess 11, even though that one's an MMO, they cannot play on the system anymore. If you're going to play, you have to play on PC. But this is a single-player experience. It takes on the gameplay from Final Fantasy XI, but it makes it like a single-player experience. This game is also set in a high fantasy world, just like Final Fantasy IX, after 7, 8, and 10 had some sci-fi elements to them too, and had some robots in it. And Final Fantasy 16 will have that when it comes out, which I'm gonna talk, I guess, a little about in this video. But yeah, but how should you play this game though? Which I'm gonna skip this cutscene because in case you want to play this game, I don't want you guys to have spoilers in it. Well, playing on a PS2 is still fine and dandy, like I said, but it's better if you just play it on modern gen consoles. Because in 2017, the Zodiac version came out on PS4. It came to PC in 2018. It came to Xbox One and Switch in 2019. Let's talk about those. Yes, this is the fifth way to play, and one of the best RPGs on the PS2. Now for modern generation consoles, and plus Final Fantasy XII was also one of the longest Final Fantasy games. But they added, but guess what? Just like Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9, how they had new speed features. This has that. As you can now speed the game, and now new features added, including new quests. You can also now have new characters, new features added, new areas to explore. This remaster in HD is a good way to play it. Play on PS4. Play on the Switch if you want to play on the go. Play on PC or on Steam, or wait for it to come to Game Pass. You'll play it on there on Xbox One. Yes, play Final Fantasy XII. It is an amazing game, and yeah, and its new features were similar to Final Fantasy X. HD remaster, new features added new graphics, new stuff. It added the Eternal Calm inside of it. It added 10-2 inside of it as well. And I think I might have had the speed thing feature, but this had it too. And yeah, this is the definitive way to play it. What else do I have to say? This game's amazing. This game's so good. And that, guys, is the PS2 era of Final Fantasy. Let's move generations again. We went from 8-bit graphics on the NES, 16 graphics on the SNES, full 3D character models on the PlayStation, to more realistic character models on the PS2, and now we're going to more of that, but in HD, on the PS3, PC, and Xbox 360. And it's also the first multi-platform Final Fantasy game. Well, at least the first one released on multiple consoles. So let's go. It's also the first time the series is on Xbox, so let's go. Let's go. Alright guys, sorry if you hear any background noise, my mom's calling someone, but anyway. Final Fantasy 13, what can I say about this one? So unlike the previous entries where they're all mostly critically acclaimed, this one only had a little of that. Because this game, if you guys didn't know, this game is very controversial. I mean, it has its fans, but it gets tons of hate. Personally, I think this game's okay. But what is the best way to play it? Well, that's sort of balanced out. I mean, here's the thing. The game came on PC and ran just as good as the PS3 version, released in 2014, 4 years after the game was released in North America, and the PS3 version ran better than the Xbox 360 version. However, if you play the Xbox 360 version on an Xbox One X, or the Series X when it comes out with backwards compatibility, it'll run super duper well, but not everyone owns an Xbox One X. They may just have an original Xbox One or an S, because I have the Xbox One S. And I will be getting a Series X though, but some are gonna get the Series S, which one of the Xbox One X enhancements. So really, just play any version. You'll have no problem with it. Just play on any console, and you'll be good to go. The same applies to the Final Fantasy 13 2 and Lightning Returns Final Fantasy 13, which by many consider to be better than the first game. But if you're gonna play all three, well, play all three. Don't just play one, just play all three. I mean, this game does have some redeeming qualities. Yes, it's linear. Yes, the games are so automatic. But 10-2 and Lightning Returns are also better as well. So just play on any console, I guess. Same applies to all the next ones coming up. And yeah. So next up, guys, we're on to the second MMO of the series. And you guys, and 2 weeks ago too, Final Fantasy 16 got announced. And guess who the director of that game is? The guy that made Final Fantasy 14. Yep, the second MMO of the series. And just like 13, just play on any console. I mean, but there are no changes, both graphically and gameplay-wise, and content, whether you're playing on PS4 or PC. And the PS3 version is not playable anymore, just like Final Fantasy 11 on the PS2 and Xbox 360. Just play on either console, and when the Xbox One version comes out, play on there. Now, maybe it'll come to PS5 and Series S and X too. And yep. So unlike 13, which was hated by many people, this game went back to what made Final Fantasy great. This game does have some hate for not, and while this game is the best Final Fantasy game, it's still an amazing entry. I mean, this game is better than 13, and better than some other Final Fantasy games. One of my favorites of the series. And just like 14, it doesn't matter where you're played on. Play the Royal Edition on the PS4 or the Xbox One. And you can get a Game Pass if you have it on Xbox too. On PC, if you have Game Pass, you can play the Windows Edition there, or you can play on Steam as well for the Windows Edition. Get the Royal Edition on the consoles, or play the Windows Edition on PC like I did. Does not matter. And yeah, and for a final stop of the day, we're looking at 7 Remake. So this game just came out a few months ago, and this is kind of like a reimagining, kind of reboot of Final Fantasy VII, despite the name Remake, because it's not actually a remake, it's more of a reboot of reimagining this game. And overall, I love this game a ton. I plan to review this game eventually, so I forgot to do it back in April, so I didn't play it until a month later. But so far, this game is only available on the PS4. However, it is likely to come. It's only a timed exclusive on there. It will be coming to Xbox One and PC in the next year, and maybe Square Enix will give us a PS5 or Xbox Series X version, and we can get a free upgrade, and maybe it'll be on Switch, because the game takes up over 100 gigabytes. So just play on PS4 now or wait for it to come out other consoles. Does not matter. And Final Fantasy 16, well, that's not out yet, so I can't talk about that one yet. But so far, it's going to be kind of exclusive on PS5, but will also come to PC and Xbox Series later on. But that wraps up for this video, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you guys next time for more HNS out. Remember to like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. Alright, now after I made all three of these videos, a PS5 version got announced, known as Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade. Now the game still is a timed PlayStation exclusive, however in June the game is going to be coming to the PS5, and if you do have the if you have the PS4 version, you get a free upgrade. However, you will need to pay an extra $20 to get the new side story with Yuffie. So yeah, like I have said before, but I've said this before too. I said in my previous video, but if you have Final Fantasy VII Remake with PlayStation Plus, you don't get the free upgrade, unfortunately. So you'd have to buy the game. But if you own the game on PS4, then you get the free upgrade, but you need to pay $20 for the Yuffie DLC. And yeah. Anyway, though, that's this video for real this time. I will see you guys next time. HNS out. But this game will be coming to Xbox and PC at some point. But see you guys next time. HNS out.